The Peak Living Network principles form the foundation for our organization, so I'm going to talk about them in some considerable detail. We're breaking them up into two groups, the core agreements and the core healing principles. So I'll talk first about the core agreements. So first of all, anything that anyone shares in the Peak Living Network is confidential, and we need that to be respected. So that means whatever someone shares with you on an online forum or at a support group or on a telephone call or in a co-counseling session, all that stuff is not to be repeated to anyone else. And this is essential to how we create any sense of safety. And a sense of safety is essential to any potential for people to be able to do meaningful emotional healing work. So, second, the Peak Living Network is an advice-free zone. That means unsolicited advice is completely unacceptable. We don't tell people you should do this. And we don't even tell people, have you tried this? Or would you like some advice? Or would you like a suggestion? Those are all advice, and those all put the person under pressure. When you say, well, can I make a suggestion? That's right away putting the person in a position where they have to say yes or no. So they're already feeling like this. Unfortunately, they're often going to say yes when they wanted to say no, because we tend to, unfortunately, have some discomfort setting the kinds of boundaries we want. It's not always easy to say no to people. Some of us have a really hard time saying no to people. So don't even ask, please. Can I make a suggestion? Would you like some advice? Those questions are off limits. And we ask people not to even do problem solving. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? That's really just a way of sneaking in your suggestions. Please leave all that aside. The reality is advice rarely helps. If you think back on who's made the biggest difference in your life, the people who've been most there for you, and you think, what was it about those people that made such a difference? It's almost never going to be, oh, they recommended that I do this, or they recommended that I do that, or they gave me a list of things to try. It's going to be because they were so there for me, because that person made me feel loved, because that person made me feel like they were going to be behind me no matter what I did. In other words, that their love was unconditional, because they listened really well, because they let me stay at their house when I needed kind of emotional refuge from whatever I was dealing with, or I just needed to be accompanied, I needed companionship. Those are the kinds of things that matter, not advice. And in fact, advice is one of the major obstacles in our times to successful human interactions, particularly when we're seeking support. What tends to happen when someone is seeking support from another human being is that the person who's in the listening role, let's say you come to me and you're starting to talk to me about something you're having a hard time with, the person who's in the listening role tends to immediately feel tense, trying to think like, oh, what am I going to recommend? How am I going to help this person solve this problem? What am I going to suggest? What kind of advice do I have for them? And so right away, they're not as present. Right away, they're not listening as well because of their tension about trying to come up with advice. And so the person who's looking for support is already not getting what they entirely wanted because they already don't have the complete presence of the person they're talking to, which is what they most desire. They most desire that person to be totally there with them. Meanwhile, the person who's talking is on guard because they know from past experience if they open up with people about significant hard things in life, they're probably going to start getting a bunch of advice. So they're already like, getting ready to defend themselves against this barrage of advice that's coming, to get ready to explain like why I haven't tried that, or why I don't want to try that, or why I know that that's not going to work, or to have to explain that I already did try that, and so forth. And at the worst that this gets, the person who's giving advice starts to be impatient with the way that the speaker is saying, no, I don't want to try that, or I have tried that, or that wouldn't work, or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, you obviously don't even want things to get better because you're just closed to everything I suggest. It's like, no, the issue is the person didn't want your suggestions. That's not what they were looking for. So both ends of this interaction, in other words, both people, the speaker and the listener, are not being able to be fully present and fully themselves because this person feels like they've got to come up with advice that this person does not want. It's really quite tragic and kind of absurd when you think of it in those terms. So when we remove advice from the equation, we completely change the way people interact with each other. Advice giving is one of our biggest blocks to the successful sharing of support, so remove it from the equation. It's a tough habit to break. And I'm not saying you'll be able to break it overnight. We make some mistakes with each other in the Peak Living Network, but we try to keep reminding ourselves and reminding each other, no advice, no suggestions, no problem solving. We're here to accompany each other, to give each other support, to be there with each other through the hard things in life, because that's what makes the real difference. The advice does not. The advice is rarely helpful to us. Next, we create an environment in the Peak Living Network where people are free to express feelings and are free to feel their feelings. So it's very important in our interactions with each other that we not tell people to feel better, that we not tell people it's all for the best, that we not tell people, oh, I'm sure this is going to be a good learning experience for you, that we not tell people, oh, the universe is sending you these things for the lessons you can learn. You may believe all those things, but we don't say that stuff to each other. You're not trying to fix people's feelings. You're not trying to skip over people's feelings. You're trying to be there with them, accompany them. That's what we're mostly looking for when we're having a hard time, is to feel accompanied by the people we're talking to. So be there with them. Don't fix it. And don't discourage them from feeling their feelings. And when people start to discharge emotions through laughter, through crying, through storming out angrily their anger, we are there for them. We don't try to make them stop. We never tell someone, oh, don't cry. It's the kind of thing we would never do in the Peak Living Network. And in fact, we believe that those discharge mechanisms are really powerful, probably the most powerful healing avenues that we have as human beings. And if you want to learn a lot more about those, you can watch the video called The Hidden Key to Emotional Healing that's on this channel that explains a lot about how those discharge mechanisms work and why they're so powerful, so transformative in human healing. So next, that all human beings are of equal value. This is an atmosphere where we can't be looking down on someone because they're young or because they're old, because somebody's a woman, because someone's a person of color, because someone's a gay man or a lesbian, because someone works with their hands or never went to much school. Like, we're not going to have that atmosphere of people considering themselves superior to other people. It means we have to listen to each other really well and learn about each other's experiences and leave these kinds of judgments and societal prejudices to the side. And that means that mutual respect is going to be important even when we are in difficult conflicts with each other. And I would say actually especially when we're in difficult conflicts with each other. When someone in the network is upset with somebody else in the network about something that they did, we have to be able to work that through respectfully. Being upset with each other is fine. Being angry is fine, but we don't put each other down. We don't make insulting kind of comments. We don't get sarcastic. We express our feelings and we listen to each other and communicate in respectful and decent ways. It's essential to the network being what it is, and it's essential to that sense of equality that we're so intent on developing and maintaining in the Peak Living Network. And that means we're going to be particularly insistent on speaking with respect to people who have historically been targets of oppression, to children, to women, to people of color, to working class people. We're going to insist, like, there's almost an extra responsibility that you've got to speak decently and respectfully, that you can't get superior, that you can't lecture people, and that you can't assume somehow that you know better about things. We're not going to talk to each other in those kinds of ways. And that means that we're really striving to take an orientation towards each other that's kind, that's loving, that's appreciative, where we're looking for each other's strengths, where we're communicating our faith in each other, where we're saying, I know you can do it. Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish in your life, you can do this. and I believe you can get well. I believe you can find the kind of emotional healing that you're craving. Like, we're with you. And that kind of kindness and loving and supportive atmosphere is what our top goal here is to create that kind of atmosphere. Next, everyone has the equal right and the equal need to be heard. And that means that even when we're in crisis, when we're in a really rough period, we still have to also continue to be there for other people. And at Peak Living Network events, we divide the time up equally. We actually time turns in a support group. We time turns in a co-counseling session, because we believe that even when we're in our really rough spots in life, that still doesn't change the fact that everyone that we're around has the equal need to be heard. And we're gonna work very hard to make that happen. Next, it's important that all physical contact between people in the Peak Living Network be thoughtful, be gentle, and be desired. We don't want anybody being touched in ways that they don't want. We don't want anybody being touched when they don't want to be touched at all. So we have to be really, really conscious of touch that is not sexual, touch that's not invasive, that's caring and affectionate, and that is welcome by the other person. And most of that is just about being attentive, because you can tell if you're paying attention when someone is not comfortable with the fact that you're touching them. And people who are chronically invasive are people who either aren't paying attention or don't care whether their touch is welcome. And for example, I get very bothered when I hear men say, well, I didn't know that the way I was touching her was bothering her. It's like, then you weren't even paying attention, because it's just not that hard to tell when touch is welcome and when it isn't. It's just not that hard to tell. So being careful, being caring, and being thoughtful about physical affection. And if you're not sure, ask. I don't really want us to create an ethic where you have to ask every time before you touch somebody. I actually think that leads to problems of its own, but you have to be thoughtful. And yes, if you can't tell, then do ask. So there's never an excuse for not having known whether touch was welcome or not, because you always could have asked. We strive to think about each other well all the time. And thinking about each other well means being aware of what we know about what goes on with somebody, being aware of what we know about where that person's vulnerabilities are, where things get hard for him or hard for her, to really be putting our heads together about how to help each other, to use our minds, to really good purposes for how to be effective supports for each other. Supporting each other well means a lot of different things. There's so much more to it than just listening well and saying, yes, I heard you. Those things are great, but there's way more than that. And we can really put our minds to the task. And then the last of the core agreements is we gather for purposes of emotional healing. So people are not to be at Peak Living Network events for any other purpose. You're not here to look for friends. You're not here to look for lovers or dating partners. Completely unacceptable to ask someone out that you know from the Peak Living Network. You're not here looking for business customers or clients for your professional practice. We want to be able to have safety that everyone's here pursuing healing. In other words, we don't want to have to worry at any gathering or any interaction with the Peak Living Network. Well, why is that person part of the network? What are they doing here? So we're agreeing from the beginning, you're here to pursue emotional healing and to support other people in theirs, and not for any other reason. So those are the key kind of action agreements that you're making if you join the Peak Living Network. And people are going to hold each other to living by those agreements in their interactions with other people in the network. I'd love to see you obviously live by those agreements in your interactions with everybody in the world, but that's up to you. But what we're saying is you're agreeing to do that stuff with people in the network, we're going to do that stuff with each other in how we interact, how we view each other, how we think about each other. So now I'm going to go to the second list, which is the Peak Living Network healing principles. And these are much more ways of thought. These aren't so much action-oriented or necessarily how we interact with each other, but ways that we think about emotional healing that are essential to a lot of our discussions and a lot of why we do things in the particular way that we do them. So first of all, we believe that people's potential for emotional healing is unlimited. We don't believe somehow, oh, this person's just too messed up, or I got too wounded, like I'll never be okay, or I'll never be able to do certain kinds of things because I'm just too hurt to ever be able to do those things. That would always be too triggering for me, or I would always be incapable of that. We believe things can turn around completely. That's why it's called the Peak Living Network, because we believe that we can live a peak quality of life. I'm not going to get there overnight, but we believe that a really deeply satisfying quality of life is attainable, and that nobody's like too hurt or too this or too that for that to be possible. And so we take an orientation, my life is going to get better and better, and I'm going to assume that your life is going to get better and better. And that creates a really nice atmosphere for all of us when those are the assumptions that we're working from. That healing is a collective process, that our ability to heal jumps dramatically when we join with other people, when we think about how we can heal together. So rather than focusing on self-help, in the Peak Living Network, we focus on working together in pairs and in groups and as a whole network to be able to facilitate and support each other's healing, share information, share support. Next, that people are naturally loving, naturally clear thinking, and naturally energetic, like living into life. And that anything else we see is either a sign of the way that person was emotionally wounded, or a sign of the way that person was societally indoctrinated by an unjust society, or a combination of those two factors. A combination of wounding and oppressive training, societal indoctrination. There's no such thing as a bad baby. Nobody comes into the world already interested in doing harm. Nobody comes into the world interested in only being the king of the castle while the servants do all the work. Nobody's interested in coming into the world to pursue violence. Nobody begins that way. It takes a ton of wounding. And I hear a lot of comment, oh, this person was just obviously always that way, or they're just born evil. It's like, no, they're not. That doesn't happen to anybody. You just watch. You just watch a baby or a toddler who's being well cared for, and it's just the evil is simply not there. Another way, though, that we know what people are really truly like is what happens when they heal emotionally. When we get a chance to heal emotionally, we become more loving, we become more open to deep connection with other people, our minds clear out, so we start to be able to think more clearly, and we start to feel smarter, and we start to be more involved in life. We start to be more up for things, more motivated, more energized. I've never seen someone like work through a bunch of their childhood issues and then as a result become much more aggressive than they used to be, or much more violent than they used to be, or suddenly someone who was really generous becomes horribly selfish. Some people who are involved in healing processes do become kind of overly self-absorbed, but they were usually kind of self-absorbed to begin with. It's just that certain ways of being involved in emotional healing can just make your self-absorption worse. But that's because their healing isn't really working. It's because they're pursuing kind of the idea part of emotional healing, but nothing's really happening for them. But when you see people saying, oh yeah, I can really feel the healing happening, they're always moving in the same direction. They're moving towards being more loving. They're moving towards a greater enjoyment of life, and they're moving towards being better able to solve problems. Like there's just, it's always moving in the same direction. Well, what does that mean? That means that that's our inherent nature, that's what human beings are like. And we come from hundreds of thousands of years, probably millions of years, of the animals that we've descended from that were forming increasingly complex societies increasingly complex human interaction and becoming more and more cooperative with each other as the millennia have gone by. So next, most of what we are struggling with, almost all of what we're struggling with in our wounds, in our ability to really enjoy our lives and function the way we want to function, almost all of that has its roots in trauma and oppression. And the word trauma, I know, is starting to get a little thrown around in our times. I'm talking about things that happen to people that were absolutely devastating, that are way beyond what a human being can tolerate without developing some lasting, perhaps life-lasting wounds. And I don't mean that they're going to last forever, but I'm saying they will last forever unless they get a chance to heal. The nature of trauma, the way I use the term, the level of injury that I'm talking about, I really mean trauma when I say trauma, that will not heal by itself. It won't just like fade over time. That's not trauma. Trauma is something that leaves deep limitations to our ability to enjoy our lives the way we want to. And it's not going to heal unless proactive things are made to happen that give us the chance to heal. And so many of our traumatic experiences are rooted in experiences of oppression, of ways that we were targeted because of groups that are systematically seen in modern society as less than, that are treated as less human, less intelligent, less valuable, less worth taking seriously. You don't have to listen to them. And so many of our deepest wounds are ways that we were targeted because we were children or women or working class or people of color, or we were in the way of some powerful person who wanted to run the show and take our land and exploit our labor and so forth. The human race is made up of people who are either children or former children. That covers everybody. We're either children or survivors of childhood. And in the modern world, this hasn't been true all through human history, but in the modern world, children are a severely oppressed group. They're laughed at, they're not taken seriously, they're not listened to, they don't have any fundamental rights that they're granted in society to be free even from physical violence or from sexual violation. There are little things that sometimes will defend children a little bit, but even the systems that are there to defend children from abuse never talk about it in terms of children's rights. They talk about it in terms of proper child rearing or functional versus dysfunctional families. It's like, no, children have rights to not be sexually violated. Children have rights to have their voices heard. Children have their rights to not be physically hit. Children have rights to be properly fed and clothed and loved. Those are their rights. And children are very, very low class in modern society, just talked about in the most negative terms, treated really just chronically horribly by adults, not just by their parents, but by the whole adult world. And so that this becomes a training ground for us then to go through and be either the oppressor or the oppressed across all kinds of other oppression lines, by gender, by class, by race, by sexual orientation, and so forth. It takes so many different forms. And so when we understand, the struggles we're having are because of trauma and oppression, not because of what's wrong with us, not because we're broken, not because we were somehow built wrong, that creates an immediate shift in how we look at ourselves and how we look at each other. It also means that we understand that emotional healing is inseparable from the creation of a just world, and that we have to fight injustice, we have to fight oppression at the same time as we work on our personal emotional healing, that those two projects are not separable, that in fact we're not going to do very well in the long run with our emotional healing unless we're also finding ways to fight oppression in the world, to stand up against injustice. And our efforts to fight oppression and to work against injustice in the world are not going to work very well unless we're also attending to our personal healing and to supporting each other's healing. There is nothing to be gained from blaming people for their own difficulties. So there's no point in saying, well, you did that yourself, or well, you wouldn't be in this position if you hadn't done this and that and the other thing. I've never heard of a time when that was in any way beneficial to anyone to be told those things. And this is a different question from whether we have to hold people accountable for how they treat other people. We do have to do that. But that's not the same as just blaming people for their own problems. That one goes nowhere. Next, we choose not to doubt what someone is saying in the Peak Living Network about their own history unless we have very serious reason to doubt what they're saying. And by and large, people do not exaggerate the mistreatment they have suffered, do not exaggerate the oppression that they have suffered. It's unusual. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm saying it's unusual. And so we don't want to start with some kind of initial skepticism. Once in a great, great while, situations will arise where we start to have reasons to doubt the veracity of what someone's saying, but it's really, really uncommon, about ways that they've been mistreated. Now, an example that people sometimes ask me about is about, well, how about abusers? Like, abusers are constantly claiming that they've been so mistreated by the woman. Well, yeah, that's an example. Well, first of all, we don't welcome abusers in the Peak Living Network. Men who have histories of abusing women are turned away from the Peak Living Network, even if they claim that they're, or believe that they're in a process of change. That's just not the kind of atmosphere we want here. People who have been in repeated and committed ways in their lives behaving oppressively, that's beyond what we can take on in the Peak Living Network. Maybe someday the Peak Living Network can be for absolutely everybody, but for now it can't be for people who have histories of behaving oppressively. If we know you've got a long history of public racist statements and racist violence, we're going to say, no, we can't really have you here. If you're a man who's got a history of abusing women, no, we can't have you here. That's about the need to be accountable for how you treat other people. And people who do have histories of behaving oppressively, chronically oppressively, and deliberately oppressively, well, then unfortunately we would have to doubt what they say about their own history, because people with those kinds of behavioral, oppressive, racist, bigoted, sexist, etc. behavioral histories are unfortunately very unreliable about their own histories of being wounded, because they manipulate the stories about their own histories to try to excuse how oppressive their behavior has been. But these are not issues that arise in any kind of chronic way, have not been an issue in the Peak Living Network. I'm not saying it won't be. There certainly will be times undoubtedly when it will be. I'm just saying it hasn't been yet. And so we want to start with an orientation of believing people, believing each other, when people start saying what they've been through. My belief is that pretty much everybody has a story to tell that's much worse than they even believe themselves. In other words, I believe you have been through much more serious things than you even think yourself you have been. Why? Because part of how trauma works when it gets that severe is that it causes us to lose huge portions from memory of what took place, because in order to survive emotionally, literally, in order to survive, in order to survive physically, actually, we were forced to shut down from memory a lot of what was happening to us emotionally, because a certain level of emotional pain will kill you. The notion of dying of a broken heart, that's a real thing, particularly for the very young children, and the very old. If you're 35 years old, you can get a broken heart and you're not going to die. But if you're 2 years old and you get a broken heart, or you're 90 and you get a broken heart, truly broken heart, I'm not just saying, oh, you got disappointed, you got sad. I'm talking about true brokenheartedness. It's a threat to your organism. You're at risk to die. And so trauma that happens at certain kinds of times in life is either when we're vulnerable, or is just so, it could be actually a certain level of trauma could probably even kill you when you're 35. The severest levels of emotional harm become a threat to us, our physical survival. So yeah, we end up just having to shut a bunch of stuff out to survive. So I don't think people are likely to be exaggerating. I think it's likely to be, if anything, worse. And we need an environment where we can tell the truth about what things have really felt like for us. And the way we create an environment where that's possible is by working from the assumption that people are not overplaying what's happened to them. If anything, they're underplaying what's happened to them. So next, people are their own ultimate authorities on what will help them heal and what won't. So we need to believe people when they say, this isn't going to work for me. There are things that we teach in the Peak Living Network healing principles. Even those are not going to work for everybody. That's why we want to work very hard to make the Peak Living Network an atmosphere where there's no dogma and where we understand that each individual is different. Certainly in my talks and in my writing, I say all kinds of things that I think are going to work for most people, and that I say, oh, this is probably the most powerful healing work that people can do usually, or for most people. Nothing is true for everybody. And we have to listen and respect when people are saying, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me, this is what I need, this isn't what I need. You are your own authority on what's going to best contribute to your emotional healing. That reminds me of another thing, which is when you come to the Peak Living Network, we don't want you to give up anything that's been working for you. There's some things we're going to encourage you to add to your healing plan, but whatever it is you're doing, if you're in psychotherapy, or you're in yoga, or you're in meditation, or you're in a spiritual system, or you're doing some kind of body work, or you're following certain self-help literature, anything that's helping you, we're going to say, keep that. Don't give up anything that's working for you. Add stuff to it. There's no need to take anything away that's working for you. Next, listening well to each other is really powerful in human healing. Loving each other, probably the single most powerful element in human healing, along with emotional discharge, which I talk about in a lot of detail other places. But it also really contributes to our own healing. That by listening really well to other people, we form a greater connection to them, and connection to human beings then in the long term is going to support our own healing. We also learn from listening really well to others' experience about our own. And there is no end point to the development of our listening skills, that we want to be lifelong working on becoming better and better and better listeners. I've been working on developing my listening skills for over 40 years. And I still avoid saying, oh, well, I'm a really good listener. And I get anxious, honestly. I'm going to tell you the truth. I get anxious when I hear anyone say, oh, well, I'm a really good listener. Because I've had so many experiences with people who said that, who turned out to not listen very well. And sometimes I've heard people say that, and it was true. But I'm just explaining why I'm a little on edge when somebody says that. What I would rather have us say is I'm always working on my listening. I think I do it pretty well, but I'm going to keep trying to get better and better and better at it my whole life. I feel like there's certain improvements I've made in how I listen just in the last few years because of a number of things I've learned after, as I say, literally decades of working on how I listen to people. So consider it a lifelong project we're all working to get better and better and better at. Next, you have really important contributions to make to the world. And I'm not just talking now about the Peak Living Network, but I'm talking about the whole world. We live in very urgent times. We need your best thinking. We need your heart, your passion and your love. We need your energy, and you've got things that the world needs. And at this point in history, we need to hear from everybody. We need everybody's input. We need everybody's insights. We need everybody's intelligence, and everybody is intelligent in different ways. I don't believe in the non-intelligent person. I believe in the person who has not yet figured out where their intelligence most lies, or other people haven't recognized where their intelligence most lies. You've got really important contributions to make, and we need those contributions. So I'm encouraging you to think not just about each other, but to think about yourself as someone whose thinking, whose intelligence, whose creativity is really valuable to other people, and we need what you have to offer. And part of why I'm eager to see you enter into a healing process, or continue in a healing process, or strengthen your healing process, is because that will help you become more and more able to share your gifts with all of us, with the world. And then lastly, that everybody has the capacity to live at a much higher level, to live in much more love, to live in much more enthusiasm, to live in much more of a sense of connection, to live in much more of a sense of community and solidarity with other human beings, and to live a life that is deeply satisfying. And you'll hear people say, well, it's unrealistic to think you can be happy all the time. And that's true, and it's completely beside the point, because the human being does not need to be happy all the time. That's not what we're craving. We're craving a life that feels satisfying. We're craving a feeling of fulfillment, of completeness, of connection. That's what the human being wants. We're not going to feel fulfilled and complete and connected unless we're happy some substantial amount of the time. We do need to be happy some substantial amount of the time. We don't need to be happy all the time. And we can have actually some pretty fulfilling times in life that are fairly unhappy, because there were hard times, but they were times when we were in solidarity with other human beings, when there was a sense of community, when there was a sense of purpose. And so even unhappy times sometimes can be quite satisfying ones. But you can't have a satisfying life that's unhappy all the time. That's not going to be a satisfying life. But you can have a very satisfying life that has some substantial times of unhappiness, as long as there's also really a lot of happiness in it. So we're capable of having a deeply fulfilling life. That's not unrealistic. And when people say, oh, the years just go flying by, and oh, life is short, that's because we're shut down. That's the impact of our wounds. You know, a 5-year-old doesn't say, oh, I can't believe I'm turning 6 already. Like a 5-year-old says, like, oh my God, it took so many years to get through the last year. That's because that's the normal passage of time. As we enter into adulthood, we drift into what's called adult shutdown, where we numb out and we start to feel empty inside. We start to feel disconnected, and then the years start to go whipping by. When you have really deep healing, time slows way, way down. And I've experienced this myself in huge ways, where suddenly a year started to feel again the way it did when I was young. And this has been true for huge portions of my adult life. The time slowed way back down to how it naturally is for the human being. It's not true that life is short. It's not true that time flies. Those are the products of shutdown. And we can overcome those. And as we get to a place of more emotional healing, where life can start to feel more deeply satisfying, not just superficially content, but deeply fulfilling, life also starts to feel long, starts to feel like satisfying. It starts to feel like, when the time comes to go, I'll be ready to go, because I will have lived a really full, complete life that lasted a really long time. So to reach for peak living makes sense. We are capable of living a really, really high quality of life. So we're going to go for it.